A huge Bitcoin bombshell last night live on Maischberger. Alice Weidel admits that she owns Bitcoin. This could change everything. We also know that the AfD is pro-Bitcoin. Meanwhile, Olaf Scholz is still banking on traditional savings accounts. But that's not all, because Alice Weidel is releasing another massive interview here, where she even talks about a potential hyperinflation that's coming for the Eurozone that we absolutely need to get out of the euro. That, of course, the AfD also wants to get out of the euro. But one should also get out of the euro because the euro is designed to fail. She even talks about an asset registry. She's talking about potential capital controls. That's coming our way. And then it makes even more sense that she owns Bitcoin. So could it really be true that the potential next chancellor understands here what's coming our way, specifically a currency collapse? And could it be that the chancellor, the potentially new, of course we don't know if that will happen, but could it be that Alice Weidel is already positioning herself here for a potential euro crash because Bitcoin is obviously the best option here? We have censorship-resistant gold that can't be inflated, where in the end, no capital controls or anything like that can really take place. And that's really something. But first, check out what she has to say here on Maischberger. She was here on stage with Sarah Wagenknecht or in a live interview and was asked here if she owns Bitcoin. Take a look at what she says.
Do you have Bitcoin? Yes. No.
So Sarah Wagenknecht says here, no, she doesn't have any Bitcoin, which is kind of understandable as someone on the left. People here often aren't so proactive about being open to Bitcoin, even though the leftists would actually be perfectly positioned to invest in Bitcoin. But they usually still try to go for redistribution. Then let's tax the rich or something like that. Alice Weidel definitely checked her out. She understands what is coming to us now. She understands why Bitcoin is so important here. We don't really know if she has a large Bitcoin allocation or just a small one, but at least we know that she's probably part of the Bitcoin party from Germany. And on top of that, she likely has a Bitcoin allocation. But at least we know that she's probably part of the Bitcoin party from Germany, and additionally has a Bitcoin allocation. And the really crazy thing is she also plans to, that was like 2 or 3 years ago or so, I even made a video about it. She had an interview once and she really went off against the euro. Explained to her why the euro is going to escalate, why the euro doesn't work, why it's basically a poorly constructed system. And back then she said, yeah, she can analyze all of that. But she doesn't have a solution here. She doesn't have a solution right now, ready. But now she has the solution ready. That means she must have figured something out. Recently, Bitcoin has become the solution for the euro problem, for the inflation problem. And now just take this in. Now a second interview has popped up. That's only a few days old. I'm not sure if this is the first broadcast, but definitely here on Twitter, it was published on January 13th. Published, so it's relatively new here, where Alice Weidel basically lays out an apocalyptic scenario that could potentially be coming our way. And for this apocalyptic scenario, everyone needs Bitcoin, everyone who doesn't own any Bitcoin here. If the scenario applies to us, that Alice Weidel is laying it all out. He's really in a very, very bad position here. Just take that in.
We're trapped in the euro. The euro is a dying, hyperinflated currency. So, next up, it won't just be walls against the free movement of workers, but capital controls. The people, the Europeans, the impoverished Europeans can no longer flee from their crumbling currency, for example, into the Swiss franc. That's why it will be made more difficult. And later, exchanging euros for Swiss francs will be outright banned. That's one thing. And then the third point is gold ban. You won't be allowed to have any gold at all. So here the threshold for anonymous gold purchases was set to 2,000 euros. That's a ridiculous amount. Lowered because of that. Because the EU wants to register everything. There's supposed to be an asset registry.
There is already an effort in that direction.
Yeah, asset registry, they're doing that now.
An asset registry.
Exactly, they're doing a general inventory now so they can really go after people with an asset tax later. Everything is supposed to be made transparent. People are being squeezed. And that's exactly the opposite. I don't want to elaborate on that further, maybe in the next conversation. But I think that's enough of a preview. These are exactly the mechanisms we've historically already experienced. The Germans should actually. The times of hyperinflation make you accustomed to balancing laws and currency death. You're not because they are no longer educated about it historically. In the schools. That's why the younger generation just doesn't know about it anymore. I'm going to tell you, the euro won't survive. And people are already being completely affected by a redistribution of wealth through inflationary developments. But in the future, it will be total. You lose your wealth and everything. And that's the outlook. And that's what these people want. Everything is being set up to crush people more and take everything away from them. And that should be a warning to everyone. That's enough.
So that was basically a Bitcoin ad, just like it's written in the book. But she's absolutely right here, because she's saying what no one else dares to say. The euro is going to die, and people who aren't prepared here are going to lose their wealth here. And that means here we actually have someone who's laying it all out on the table and speaking frankly. The one who says, yeah, everything is safe, the euro is safe. Hey, don't worry, just stash your gold in the savings account. Olaf Schnitz, he's making sure everything runs smoothly. And we really need to get real here. We need to lay all the cards on the table. And when you lay all the cards on the table, you also have to clearly acknowledge this. Hey, the euro is a sinking ship. It's the Titanic. Really. Probably already crashed into the mountain. And now it's basically heading into the process of sinking. Now we just have to wait. Okay, are there still 5 years? Are there still 10 years? Are there different scenarios now? How this could play out? But what's going to happen here? And that's clearly shaping up here. That in such a sinking scenario, of course, everything is going to get a lot more restrictive. That means we have to figure something out now to somehow keep the sinking ship afloat. That obviously doesn't work properly. But you can somewhat manage it with means like CBDCs, asset registers, capital controls, and so on. You can somewhat keep that in check. I'm saying it again. Folks are going to lose everything here. Asset registers, capital controls, and so on can keep what you have here in check to a certain extent. She's really saying it. I'll say it again. Folks are going to lose everything here. So anyone who doesn't have Bitcoin here, anyone who doesn't have assets somewhere outside the EU, outside the Eurozone, and so on, is really in big trouble, and then it gets serious. Here we have Alice Weidel talking about Bitcoin, and so far, I mean, you just have to put 2 and 2 together. She's smart enough to realize that the euro is doomed to fail. Then it's obviously also smart to jump on the Bitcoin boat in the next move. Because I'll say it again, when the Titanic goes down, there are, of course, lifeboats. And then there are different lifeboats. Some lifeboats are better, some lifeboats are worse. There are, for example, lifeboats like real estate. That's where you can get in. You can preserve your purchasing power there. But what happens when you have an overreaching state? What happens when a euro is sinking? Then there's a burden sharing. That means you can protect yourself from inflation with real estate. But then there's a burden sharing, and then there's some kind of property tax here. Or what do I know? Are the property regulations going to be skyrocketed? And then you really don't get anything from the property. That means real estate is a lifeboat, but it's a lifeboat with 2 or 3 holes in it. Then there's the lifeboat savings account, which doesn't just have 2 holes, it has like 10 holes. You just sink right away. Then there's also the lifeboat. Bonds, you can get into those too, but they also have like 10 or 20 holes or something, and they sink right away. Stocks outside the Eurozone, okay, hey, that's still a good option. For example, if you say, hey, there's only going to be a euro crash and not a complete fiat crash, then you can invest in American stocks or something like that. Or you're smart and invest in a decentralized currency like Bitcoin. Or for that matter, gold. Gold has also gone through all the inflations, all the hyperinflations over the centuries. And now here comes the kicker. She's talking about a potential gold ban. She also says it's ridiculous that you can only buy gold for 1,000 euros. And if there's a gold ban, then a Bitcoin ban isn't far behind. A potential gold ban. She also says it's ridiculous that you can only buy gold here for 1,000 euros. And if there's a gold ban here, then a Bitcoin ban isn't far behind, of course. Of course, you can't really do that. The Bitcoin ban is pretty clear. All the bans in the past have always failed. You can't ban math or language either. It's the same with Bitcoin. And that's why the gold ban didn't work. But you can make it so difficult for people to use Bitcoin and gold here that people will basically choose not to use Bitcoin voluntarily, just because there are so many regulations. Here, using Bitcoin and gold makes it so that people basically choose not to use Bitcoin voluntarily, because there are just so many regulatory hurdles. There are hurdles, too much KYC, too annoying, some kind of Satoshi test, and who knows what else you have to do now. Position yourself in Bitcoin now as they might close on and off-ramps. That you start positioning yourself now, really getting into Bitcoin, filling your bags already, because at some point it could really happen. That at some point they might close the on and off ramps. That you might not even be able to get into Bitcoin anymore. Is this scenario a bit far-fetched? A lot is changing again at the moment, also now because of Donald Trump. If the US opens up to Bitcoin, then sooner or later, the EU will probably have to open up to Bitcoin too. But the doomsday scenario that Alice Weidel is talking about, I wouldn't say it's just a complete conspiracy theory. It's actually based on some real concerns. It's a scenario that we've seen historically over and over and over again. So Alice Weidel basically just looked into the history books and checked out what happened back then. Okay, hyperinflation, what happened back then? Then there was the gold ban, capital flight controls, stricter regulations, KYC. Of course, in a different form of KYC, just like back then and today and so on. And in the end, it's just going to repeat itself again, just with different parameters. Today, we basically have digital worlds. Today, everything looks a bit different. Gold may no longer be traded so much physically, but perhaps more digitally. Now there's also Bitcoin and so on. But in the end, this just outlines a scenario that has repeated itself over and over again. So first, gold goes down. Then next, what happens? There's inflation. What's the next thing that happens? People want to flee into the Swiss franc, into Bitcoin, whatever, francs, into Bitcoin, whatever. Then the states basically say, hey, we're going to put capital controls in place. You can only buy 500 euros worth of Bitcoin per month. You can only buy 500 euros worth of gold per month. You can only exchange 500 euros per month into Swiss francs. What's the next thing that happens? If that doesn't help, the capital controls, because of course there will be a black market. What's the next thing that happens? That there's basically framing going on from the state side. So then it's just said, okay, anyone who uses gold, anyone who uses Bitcoin, and anyone who buys American stocks, he's just right-wing. He's a traitor, he's a Nazi, or whatever. Then you throw out some slogans, doing some kind of framing, just like it's already being done in some ways now, that you just push people into a corner. You don't bring any arguments there. They just try to create an enemy image here through repetition. And then it goes even further. Then it said, for example, that the people who are now fleeing into Swiss francs, the people who are now fleeing into Bitcoin, fleeing into gold, or fleeing into stocks abroad, these are basically the people who are responsible for that the euro is hyperinflating here. Because people are leaving the euro area. The euro is hyperinflating here, and they do have a point there. Because as long as everyone stays in the euro, as long as it works, it stops. As soon as people start to leave, it just doesn't hold up anymore. But the problem is, you can't force people to stay in a Ponzi scheme. At some point, there's just the point of no return, where people won't let themselves be fooled any longer. And then a system like that just collapses. And instead of making the euro more attractive here, they're just trying to close the gates to the outside. That means you're putting up an invisible wall. That's the tactic that's being used a lot right now. That they don't make Germany more attractive, for example. But rather, they're just preventing people from breaking out of Germany to emigrate with, let's say, an immigration tax with exit taxation and stuff like that. And it's the same with gold, of course. Instead of making gold more attractive, instead of making Germany a more attractive place for business, you just pile on more regulations, you just pile on even more. Taxation, capital controls, exit taxes, then you go ahead and criminalize the people. And that's basically what's playing out here and what Alice Weidel is outlining. Now, we don't have any time left to go into the other interview. I've already made another video about that. So Alice Weidel basically outlined that. How the euro construct is basically set up wrong here. And here, the national debt is exploding. And that's why the euro is basically doomed to fail. Let's just say it's condemned. And back then, she really said that she doesn't see any solution now. That's just what you see so often. Even with the left, for example, someone like Sarah Wagenknecht, who was also on Maischberger, she had some really good analyses at times. She analyzes very precisely, okay, the gap between the rich and the poor is too wide, too far apart. But then Sarah Wagenknecht comes to the conclusion, okay, now we have to tax the rich because then we can bring the gap closer together. But that's just absolute nonsense. Because the gap between the rich and the poor, that obviously comes from the fiat money system. That means instead of understanding where the cause is, what are we doing here? We're just treating the symptoms. That means the rich aren't rich because they're bad people. They're rich because they've simply understood how the Cantelor effect works, how the fiat money system works. And that's also what Alice Weidel is criticizing here, that there's just no education here, that there are gaps in education. And that's where you really have to start. In the end, education needs to be optimized. You have to optimize gold. You have to invest in Bitcoin, on freedom tools. Things that can't be censored. Things that are built in a decentralized way. No central shitcoins and so on. And that's where you have to start. And you really have to understand that. That here gold is the fundamental problem and not just now we're just going to take all the gold away from the rich and then we've somehow fixed everything. You can never create a better world by inflicting violence here. I always say violence is never a solution because that's also what the left never talks about. That basically such a redistribution, such a taxation is always based on violence and always relies on coercion. And I mean, how can you bring love into the world when you basically, it's compulsive violence and with wars. And what do I know? I tried. That just doesn't work. Voluntariness, good incentives through fair gold, through transparent gold. That's really the path we need to take here. And now I have an absolute recommendation for you. And now we have our new Bitcoin Princess Hotler in the Bitcoin Hotel shop. You can check it out down below. There are the ultra cool Bitcoin Hotlers here. which will definitely take your home to the next level. Of course, you can give them away. That will definitely bring you a lot of prosperity, bringing success and happiness into your life. Anyone who has a hodler like that will definitely be able to ride some crazy Bitcoin price increases. Of course, it's a bit exaggerated, I get that. But can you definitely put it in your living room or just give it away? To the orange pill. Of course, it's totally awesome. So, the kids are going totally wild too, here at the crazy hodler. Of course, it's limited to 210 pieces. It's brand new in our shop now. Check it out down below. I'll put a link to that. And if you want to buy more Bitcoin, I recommend you 21 Bitcoin, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. I'll also put a link down below for you. Here's the code Bitcoin, up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. I'm signing off here with my bruised eye from the jail cell here in El Salvador. See you later. Peace out.